Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice! Huh, I guess it didn't work. Hey, it's showtime! Oh my god, it worked? That's right, babes, and now it's time that this ghost with the most shows the world just what I'm made of. Alright, now hold on a minute. I got to review your movie first before we do anything, so stay put for a while, will ya? Yeah, sure, whatever. Alright, so here's the review. Caution. The following video is an in-depth review of the movie I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then please feel free to watch this movie first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this movie, or you just want to know my thoughts on this movie, then keep watching. Beetlejuice was the second major film that Tim Burton directed, with the first being Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It was also my first introduction to Tim Burton's works, and let's just say that Beetlejuice didn't quite make me fall in love with Tim Burton's works at the time. I was actually introduced to the character of Beetlejuice through the animated series, and while the animated series wasn't that bad, I was downright terrified of the opening theme song. I was scared of all the disturbing imagery that was being shown in the opening, and what's even worse, the music sounded so creepy to me. And when I finally got the chance to see the actual movie years later, I was still terrified by the movie. I also remember having a Beetlejuice action figure when I was little, and the action figure would have snakes come out of Beetlejuice's head whenever I pushed down Beetlejuice's arms. But eventually we gave that action figure away. Was I upset that we gave away that action figure? No. But I definitely would like to have those new Beetlejuice Funko Pops since they look way cuter than the action figure that I used to have. Anyway, I eventually got over my fear of this movie when I watched this movie a second time around, and I realized that it wasn't as scary as I originally thought it was. Sure, it still had its creepy moments, but the humor in this movie helped balance out the horror elements and made it a fun experience for me. And it was also at this point that I started having a better appreciation for Tim Burton's works. Now, before I get into what I liked and hated about this film, I would like to give out a brief summary of this film. The film starts off with a nice couple named Adam and Barbara Maitland, planning on spending a nice vacation in their own home. When the couple went out driving through the town, they ended up in a car accident. When they finally got back home, they found out that they had died in a car accident and are now wandering around their house as ghosts. Soon after, things get worse for them as a new family, the Dietz family, has moved into their house and are remodeling their house, much to the Maitlands' dismay. The Maitlands then try to scare off the Dietz family, but since no one can see them, except for their daughter Lydia, their efforts are all in vain. So the Maitlands decide to hire a bioexorcist named Beetlejuice to help them scare off the Dietz family. But the Maitlands and the Dietz family would soon realize that Beetlejuice is not as friendly or trustworthy as they originally thought. Beetlejuice was an unusual and unique type of film. Since its release, there has been no other film quite like it. Sure, there are a lot of horror movies where the ghost will haunt the inhabitants of the house, but we never got a horror comedy film where the ghost failed to scare off the inhabitants of the house because the inhabitants can't see them. Also, we rarely seen a horror movie that actually explored the world of the dead and the complications that the world of the living can cause them. One of the main aspects of the film that I really enjoyed was the fact that it discussed how the world of the dead works. You rarely seen many horror movies that actually show us what the world of the dead is like and how the dead people are dealing with being dead themselves. I love the idea about the world of the dead being portrayed as bureaucracy, as it adds a more creative flair to the idea of death. Usually when we think of death, we think of it as being a horrifying place that is full of rotting corpse, skeletons, and possibly fire and brimstone, depending on how you view it. But in the case of this movie, while there are still corpses and skeletons inhabiting the world of the dead, they are shown as working in a bureaucracy and the clients of the people who have just recently died. The bureaucracy's goal in this movie is to help the newly dead arrivals get used to being dead, and to help them try to scare off unwanted guests in their homes. The Maitlands even have their own caseworker named Juno, who would try to help the Maitlands get settled to being dead, while trying to help them scare off the Dietz family. Oh, and to add on to that, when the Maitlands died at the beginning of the movie, they suddenly got a handbook that teaches new ghosts about the rules of the afterlife. It's interesting that in this movie, the afterlife has its own set of rules that they have to follow, and if any of the rules got broken, then the afterlife could be in real danger. It's like when you get a new job or you go to a bureaucracy in real life, and they give you a handbook on how their companies function and what rules you should follow. And if you break those rules, then either you get fired from your job, or the bureaucracy could drop you. So in this movie, when the Maitlands broke several rules that the afterlife bureaucracy had laid out for them, they of course had to deal with the consequences of their actions. Although, to be fair, the Maitlands are new to this, and the problems that they cause for the bureaucracy are more like them not understanding how the rules of the afterlife actually works. Another theme that the film explores is about whether or not death is as mysterious and intriguing as some people think it is. The Maitlands, of course, are not happy with being dead because there were many things that they haven't done while they were still alive, such as trying to have children. But since they died, they can't really have any children or do any of the things that they wanted to do when they were alive. With Lydia, however, it's a much more different story. Throughout the film, Lydia was interested in the world of the dead. So when she found out that the Maitlands were ghosts, she decided that she wanted to die too so she could spend more time with the Maitlands. Luckily though, Barbara and Adam managed to talk Lydia out of this notion by explaining to her that death doesn't necessarily make things easier. Life can be complicated, and sometimes we want to find an easy way out of our problems, but sometimes we just have to deal with the problems handed to us and try to learn from our experiences. So basically, the movie's message seems to be that even though life can get hard at times, we should try to enjoy our lives as much as we can, because one day you might die, and you regret not being able to do the things that you wanted to do when you were alive. Now that I talked about the themes in this movie, I would like to talk about the characters themselves. The first set of characters that I wanted to talk about are the Maitlands themselves. I was actually surprised that the Maitlands were the main protagonists of this film instead of Beetlejuice. Well, to be fair, Beetlejuice is the main antagonist of this film, but I'll talk about him later. Anyway, I really love the Maitlands because not only are they the nicest characters in the entire film, but they are probably the most normal characters in the movie, even though they are ghosts. Adam and Barbara are portrayed as a nice couple who just wanted to spend time together in their large house. But when they died, we get to see how they are trying to cope with being dead and also trying to understand how the afterlife works. I had mentioned before in my original review of this movie that I like the fact that we got to know the Maitlands more before they died, because it helped me sympathize more with the Maitlands' predicament at being dead. I still stand by this statement because I was truly invested in the Maitlands as characters at the beginning of the film. And when they died, I felt the same sadness and frustration that they felt at being dead and not being able to do the things that they had wanted to do when they were alive. I love the fact that despite Adam and Barbara being dead, they never let this unfortunate situation destroy their love for each other. Adam and Barbara truly loved each other when they were alive, and even after they died, they still supported each other and still acted like a loving couple. Adam and Barbara's loving relationship with each other is what brings in the heartwarming aspects to the story, and my heart can't help but melt every time we see them together on screen. I also love their relationship with Lydia, Charles and Lydia the Daughter. At the beginning of the film, Adam and Barbara were trying to conceive a child, but they were unable to. And things got worse for them when they died and they realized that they can't have any children since they are dead. Enter Lydia, a young girl who was miserable with her life but was interested in the world of the dead. Once Lydia meets up with the Maitlands, she starts taking a liking to them, and the Maitlands start liking her as well. It becomes much more pronounced later on in the movie when the Maitlands found out that Lydia wanted to be dead so that she could join the Maitlands. Adam and Barbara then talk Lydia out of this notion by warning her that being dead is not going to make things easier for her. I love the fact that towards the end of the movie, the Maitlands were able to become second parents towards Lydia since Lydia became the daughter that they never had. It's interesting that the Maitlands are shown as being the more loving and attentive parents in contrast to Charles and Lydia's often dismissive yet well-meaning parenting towards Lydia. This helps Lydia be more trusting of the Maitlands, and the Maitlands really wanted to help Lydia get through her emotional ordeal. The Maitlands probably wouldn't have been memorable characters if it weren't for the fantastic performances by Alec Baldwin as Adam and Gina Davis as Barbara. Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis did a fantastic job of portraying a friendly ghost couple who are still trying to get used to the idea of being dead. I also like the way that they portrayed the Maitlands at being upset at their ordeal due to them wanting to do more things when they were alive, like trying to have a child together. And I really love the way that Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis made Adam and Barbara into such caring and loving characters, especially during their scenes with Lydia. I also find it interesting that the Maitlands seem to be in a totally different film due to their personalities. They are shown as being a loving couple, and yet they could be interpreted as being vanilla protagonists due to them not having quirky personalities like the rest of the cast. When you compare them to the Dietz family and Beetlejuice himself, they are probably the most normal characters in the movie. Now, I would have expected that having normal characters in a creepy yet bizarre film wouldn't work out due to them feeling out of place. But in this case, it actually worked out. The Maitlands actually brought a good balance between the serious moments in the film and the more comedic moments, and it made the film a joy to watch. And now I would like to talk about the Dietz family themselves. The Dietz family was probably the most interesting family that I have ever seen portrayed on film. What happens when you have a family who are being haunted by some ghosts, but either they can't see the ghost or they are more amused by the ghost's antics and they want to create a tourist attraction for the town because of the ghost's antics? That's the Dietz family for you. The Dietz family are surprisingly eccentric, and it was interesting seeing them wanting to move to a quieter place to escape from the city life. The moment that they are introduced into the movie starts becoming a bit crazier, although nowhere near as crazy as when Beetlejuice gets introduced later on. Each member of the Dietz family has their own unique personalities that really made them stand out from each other. Charles Dietz, Lydia's father and Delia's husband, seems like the most normal member of the family, as he is not into the weird stuff that Delia and Lydia are into. Also, he wanted to move away from the city to a small, quiet town because he wanted to relax more, which is a pretty normal reason as far as this movie is concerned. But after the hilarious banana boat song scene, where both Delia and Charles become more aware of the Maitland's presence, although they still haven't seen them yet, he becomes just as obsessive with fame and fortune, just as his wife Delia is, while Lydia becomes sailing in the boat with them. Jeffrey Jones did a fantastic job of portraying Charles as being more neurotic than Lydia and Delia, and he also did a great job of making Charles into a more generic character, since he doesn't do weird art like Delia or is into the subject of death like Lydia is. Delia Dietz, Lydia's stepmother, was a truly interesting character, as she is seen as being the type of evil stepmother towards Lydia. But in actuality, she cares about Lydia and is just stressed out at trying to find a new inspiration for art, making her into a more sympathetic character. I also found it interesting that Delia's art sculptures are creepy and bizarre, which actually fits in pretty well with the wacky and creepy tone of this movie. I'll admit that I was impressed with Delia's art sculptures, and I kind of wish that I had one of those sculptures to use for Halloween decorations. Catherine O'Hara's performance was fantastic, as she did a fantastic job of making Delia so snobby yet eccentric, and it really made me get into her character. I also love the way that Catherine O'Hara is constantly acting preppy throughout the movie, despite the creepy atmosphere of the film. And finally, I would like to talk about Lydia, the daughter of Charles and Delia Dietz. Lydia is probably the most interesting character in the Dietz family, as she seems to have the most issues to deal with than her parents. Lydia is shown as being miserable throughout the movie, and is trying to find a purpose in her life. She is also obsessive with the War of the Dead, and when she becomes the only person to see the Maitlands, at first, she becomes even more interested with the War of the Dead. I loved her statement when she explains to the Maitlands about how she can see them when no one else can by stating, "I, myself, am strange and unusual." I really like this quote because it says a bit about myself. Now, I'm not as obsessive about death like Lydia is, but I am into things that are strange and unusual, as this movie is evidence of that. I really loved her relationship with the Maitlands, as the Maitlands are very understanding of Lydia's situation, and they seem to be the only people that Lydia will open up to. I also love the fact that the Maitlands try to help Lydia out with her predicament, as Lydia wanted to be dead since she believes that she would be much happier. But the Maitlands managed to talk her out of this, and help her find a reason to live. This shows how much Lydia considers the Maitlands to be her second parents, since the Maitlands are much more caring about Lydia's needs than her own parents are occasionally. I am a bit curious about why Lydia is so miserable with her life at the beginning of the movie. The movie never really explained about why Lydia is so miserable and why she is so obsessive about the concept of death. Did something terrible happen to her when she was living in the city? Or was she just bored and wanted a bit more excitement in her life? One interpretation that is often thrown around is that Lydia is probably upset that her real mother isn't with her anymore. And the reason why she's so obsessed with death is because she wanted to be with her real mother in the afterlife. Now, that is just a theory, and it was never directly stated in the film. But remember, Delia is Lydia's stepmother, at least according to this movie, since the animated TV series seems to have a different explanation for Lydia and Delia's relationship to each other. And Lydia didn't have a good relationship with Delia at first, during the movie. So maybe Lydia was trying to find the loving affection that she craved for, and because the Maitlands are much more affectionate than her own parents, Lydia thought that dying would be the best option for her. Winona Ryder was fantastic as Lydia, as she captures Lydia's moody nature very well. I always bonded to the scenes where Lydia gets emotional, like doing the terrifying beetle snake scene where she is seriously afraid for herself and her family's life. It shows how vulnerable Lydia is, and I think that Winona Ryder captured those emotions extremely well. Now I'd like to talk a bit about Otho, Delia's second in command when it comes to interior designing. I'm actually surprised that I didn't mention Otho at all in my original review of this movie, especially since he contributed a lot to the problems that both the Maitlands and the Dietz family ended up facing during the second half of the film. Otho was a very unusual character for me because either you hated him for his pompous and arrogant personality, or you're interested in his character because even though he can't see the ghosts, he is still into the supernatural like Lydia is and wanted to see how the supernatural world works. It kind of makes me wonder about why he and Lydia don't get along since they are both into the supernatural. You would think that Otho would be more understanding of Lydia's obsession with the supernatural since he is obsessed with the supernatural also. I guess it's because Otho wants to control the supernatural while Lydia doesn't, is what sets them apart from each other. The late Glenn Shaddix did a fantastic job of portraying Otho, as he made Otho into such an arrogant character who happens to be into the supernatural world. And even though Otho is supposed to be a character that we should hate, I can't bring myself to hate him because Glenn Shaddix made him into such an interesting and likable character. And finally, I would like to talk about the ghost with the most himself, Beetlejuice. I'm actually surprised that despite the fact that this movie is called Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice himself was only in a few scenes of this movie. I was expecting Beetlejuice to be the main focus of this film, but the real protagonists in this film are the Maitlands and the Dietz family themselves. Despite that, however, I actually didn't mind this because I think that the movie did a great job at using Beetlejuice's character when they needed him. Since the movie has a good balance between drama and comedy, it was definitely a wise move not to make Beetlejuice the main protagonist, or the villain protagonist in this case. I'm not saying that Beetlejuice is a horrible character, he's far from that. But having Beetlejuice as the main protagonist would have downplayed the movie's more dramatic moments, and the balance between comedy and drama would have been lost on the audience. Also, there's the fact that this movie talks about the subject of death, and that is usually a very serious topic to talk about. If the movie had a mostly comedic character as the protagonist while discussing about the more serious side of death, then it would have made the tone of the movie seem unbalanced. Anyway, let's talk about Beetlejuice himself. Beetlejuice was probably the most entertaining character in the entire movie, as while he has a creepy appearance, he has the most hilarious and lively personality out of the entire cast. He was such an unusual and unique character as while he's a ghost to a certain extent, he doesn't quite act like your regular ghost. Heck, the Maitlands act more like regular ghosts than Beetlejuice does. He's usually dressed up in a snazzy black and white suit, and he's constantly cracking jokes in every scene he's in. However, Beetlejuice can be scary when the situation requires it. Like when he transformed into a giant snake to scare off the Dietz family, and when he pulled off his scary face to show the Maitlands just how scary he could be. However, despite all that, it's really hard to be terrified of him when he's such a hilarious character. Michael Keaton's performance as Beetlejuice was a huge standout in this movie. I love the way that Michael Keaton portrayed Beetlejuice as being a loud, crude, and hilarious ghost, and I love the energy that Michael Keaton brought to the character. It's actually pretty interesting to me that Michael Keaton is so energetic and wild in this role. In most of the movies that I've seen that feature Michael Keaton, he's usually playing a character who is serious and subdued, like his portrayal of Batman in the Tim Burton directed Batman films. So imagine how shocked I was when I found out that Michael Keaton was playing as Beetlejuice and he acted so crazy in this role. It makes me wish that Michael Keaton had more roles like this where he plays a crazy and hilarious character and just lets loose with his acting. Now I briefly want to talk about my favorite scene in the movie, the Banana Boat song scene, because it would be a crime to not mention this scene. I always loved this scene because of how the Maitlands made Dilly and Charles Guest dance to the Banana Boat song against their will just to scare them out of the house. But of course, this doesn't work as the Dietz family and their guests enjoy dancing to the song. Heck, if a ghost made me dance to one of my favorite songs, I probably would have been more entertained than scared. This is seriously the funniest scene in the entire movie, although it's surprising that Beetlejuice is not involved in this scene. Well, Beetlejuice does eventually show up at the Dietz house in the next scene, but not in a funny way. So now that I talked about the things that I liked about this film, and man oh man were there a lot of things to like about this film, I would like to talk about some of the problems that I had with this film. For one thing, there were several things in this movie that confused me. Like for instance, in one scene Juno, the Maitlands caseworker, tells the Maitlands that they have to scare off the Dietz family. She then tells the Maitlands that they need to change their faces to make themselves look scarier, which the Maitlands do just that. But here's the thing. A few scenes before, the Maitlands couldn't scare off the Dietz family because the family couldn't see them. So what makes Juno think that the Maitlands can still scare off the Dietz family when the family, sans Lydia, still can't see the Maitlands? And just how can Adam and Barbara make themselves known to the Dietz family or to anyone who is still alive? Another scene that confused me was the scene where the sandworm comes into the Dietz house and eats up Beetlejuice during Beetlejuice's and Lydia's forced wedding. So basically the Maitlands can't leave their house or else they would end up on the planet Saturn and have to deal with the sandworm that lives there. So if that's the case, then how did the sandworm manage to come inside the Maitlands house when early on the sandworm didn't bother coming into the Maitlands house? Was it because Barbara forced the sandworm to come through the house, or can the sandworm get into any location that it desires? I could chalk this up as the ghosts are able to reality warp through any place they desire, but it's still a confusing situation. Also, I felt that some of the characters weren't that well developed, which were mostly the Dietz family. We don't really know how miserable the Dietz family was in the city and why they wanted to move to a small town in the first place. All we know is that Charles wanted to relax more and Delia wanted more inspiration for her art. I had also mentioned before about why Lydia was so miserable and how I wanted to know more about her background and why she's so obsessed with death. There have been rumors going on for decades that Beetlejuice was supposed to get a sequel called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, but as of this video, the sequel still hasn't been made, and it's unknown at this point if Beetlejuice will ever get a sequel. Personally, I don't know if Beetlejuice should get a sequel in this day and age, since 1, most of the actors and actresses who played in this movie have all gotten older, and 2, Tim Burton's films have changed a lot over the years, and I don't know if the sequel will have the same type of humor that was shown in this movie. But if that sequel ever does get made, I guess we'll have to wait and see how it would turn out. Beetlejuice is rated PG, and even though the reason for this rating was never given, I'm going to safely say that the reasons is for some crude moments, scary action and imagery, and brief strong language. However, I don't agree with this rating since I think that the movie should have been rated PG-13. But before I go into that, I would like to give out a brief history on the PG-13 rating. The PG-13 rating was created in 1984, after many parents had complained about the violence and gore in the movies Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins. The PG-13 rating was basically the middle ground between the PG-rated films and the R-rated films. So, the reason why I said that Beetlejuice should have gotten a PG-13 rating was because Beetlejuice himself had dropped the F-bomb in one scene, which is something that would automatically give any movie a PG-13 rating. Also, the way that this film approached the subject of death was way more mature than what you would normally see in any PG-rated film. But to be fair, the PG-13 rating was still relatively new at the time, so the MPAA didn't quite have any standards set for what qualified a movie for a PG-13 rating. Originally, I had given Beetlejuice a score of a 9.5 out of 10, but after rewatching this movie again, I actually enjoyed it a lot more this time around. So I am giving Beetlejuice a score of a 9.7 out of 10. Even though there were some moments in the film that confused me, and I wish that they had developed some of the characters better, this was indeed one of the most creative and hilarious horror comedies that I have ever seen. All of the actors and actresses really gave it their all in portraying these characters, and the film had the perfect balance between horror and comedy. This was also one of Tim Burton's weirdest films, although as of this video, I haven't seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure yet, so it's possible that that film might be the weirdest movie ever directed by Tim Burton. It just shows how creative Tim Burton's earlier works were, and I wish that he directed more films like this in the near future. It's no wonder that this movie was considered one of the top comedies of the 1980s and continues to be a cult classic to this very day. Hope you enjoy my review of Beetlejuice. Alright girls and ghouls, the show's over, so let the ghost with the most show you how to have a good time. Hold on a second, can I just say 3 things? Yeah, what? Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice! Hey now, wait a minute! Nailed it. Hey guys, like this video? Then please feel free to hit that like button. And also, hit that subscribe button for more content about video games, movies, and TV shows from this channel. And now, let's roll the credits, please.